Committee on Natural Resources, Environment, Tourism, and Outdoor Recreation will come to order. Madam Clerk, will you take the roll?
Chair Pohotsky.
Here.
Representatives Hill.
Here.
Shannon.
Present.
Arbit. McFall.
Here.
Pies.
Present.
Martin.
Here.
Preston.
Here.
Shriver.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 8 members present. You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Representative McFall moves to approve the minutes from last committee hearing. Hearing no objection, the minutes are approved. First up, we have a substitute to adopt and then a bill to refer on House Bill 4590, which, as you may remember, last week we heard testimony designating the monarch butterfly as the official migratory insect of the state of Michigan. The substitute is available for everyone in front of them. Rep. Hill moves that we adopt the substitute. Madam Clerk, will you please take the roll?
On adopting the substitute, Chair Pohotsky.
Yes.
Representatives Hill.
Yes.
Shannon.
Yes.
Arbit. McFall.
Yes.
Pies. Martin.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Shriver.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 6 yeas and 1 nay, 0 pass. The substitute is adopted.
Thank you very much. And next up, we will take the vote to report House Bill 4590. Representative Shannon makes the motion. Madam Clerk, will you take the call or take the roll? Oh, sure.
I just wanted to make mention, looking at the butterfly and the migratory, I just want to make mention that I asked how much it costs for a bill to get passed through the legislature, and it's about $12,000 on average. So I just want to remind people of that, of how much it costs for legal background, fiscal analysis, committee time, legislative time. I'd be more than happy to vote for a freely elected butterfly over a monarch, but I'm not opposed to it.
How much did it cost for you to make that comment?
I was here for the $12,000.
All right, thank you. All right, Madam Clerk, will you please take the roll?
On the motion to report, Chair Pohotsky.
Yes.
Representatives Hill.
Yes.
Shannon.
Yes.
Arbit. McFall.
Yes.
Pies. Martin.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Shriver.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 6 yeas, 1 nay, 0 pass. House Bill 4590 is recommendation as substituted.
Thank you very much. Doing the work of the people. Next up, we are going to have testimony on Senate Bill 26, which has been introduced by Senator Chang. If you'd like to come up. The floor is yours.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to Chair Pohotsky and committee members. Today, I'm really excited to talk to you about Senate Bill 26, a bill to create the Air Quality Enforcement and Mitigation Fund. Ever since my first year as state representative, I've attended countless DEQ and now EGLE hearings related to air quality violations in and around my district. At each of these hearings, residents would often advocate for certain changes and give their feedback on the proposed consent order developed as a result of conversations between the department and the violating company. And at every single one of those hearings, residents would talk about how the fine being paid to the state wouldn't be coming back to their neighborhood, even though they are the ones who experienced the air pollution as a result of the violation. Because the law does not say where the fines should go, they go to the general fund. After hearing this so many times and talking one-on-one with residents after these hearings, I said to myself, we need to do something about this. So I pulled together a few groups and community residents for a meeting at my office to try and figure out how we could change where the money goes. This bill is a result of those conversations with residents who have been affected by air quality concerns in environmental justice communities. Often the folks that we worked with either have had or have a close family member with asthma, COPD, or other respiratory diseases. In Detroit, the asthma hospitalization rate for children is 3 times the statewide rate. The burden is heavy for some of the neighborhoods that I've had the honor of serving in the legislature. And they want to see the money from the fines paid to the state for air quality violations come back to their neighborhoods to help mitigate the impact of pollution. So what does Senate Bill 26 do? It creates the Air Quality Enforcement and Mitigation Fund and outlines how the funds would be spent to mitigate air pollution in communities facing disproportionate environmental burden. Currently, when a company violates the air quality standards or their permit, the result is often a consent order that details what steps the company must take to prevent the situation from happening again, along with a monetary fine. Fines are calculated using EPA guidelines and then negotiated with the company. Right now, our laws do not provide a mechanism to ensure that the fines paid actually are directed to mitigating the harm in the community polluted by the company. So under SB 26, all civil and administrative fines collected under Part 55 would be deposited into the new Air Quality Enforcement and Mitigation Fund. Note that funding needed for supplemental environmental projects done at the facility for air pollution prevention or air pollution reduction or air monitoring will still be able to occur. The money needed for those projects, such as improving pollution control equipment or other changes directly at those facilities, wouldn't go into this fund. 30% of the money in the fund would go towards EGLE functions that benefit environmental protection communities and are related to mitigation of air pollution through increased air monitoring or improved compliance assistance from EGLE to the companies that they work with. And 70% would be granted to nonprofits, local governments, colleges and universities, or school districts through an air quality community impact grant program to address air pollution mitigation, air monitoring, improved compliance, health impact assessments, or education and training programs for residents and regulators to increase the effectiveness of enforcement programs. Funds for buffering, air filters, diesel engine retrofits, and other mitigation projects in the community would also be granted with this portion of the fund. EGLE will develop guidelines for implementation of the grant program and develop such rules in guidelines, not rules, in consultation with an advisory committee that includes a public health expert, a representative of an environmental justice organization, DHHS, a representative of a local health or environmental department, and 2 residents of environmental protection communities. The bill notes that grants would prioritize environmental protection communities defined as geographic areas that EGLE identifies using either their MI-EJ screen tool or the EPA's EJ screen tool as communities facing disproportionate environmental burden, using indicators such as sensitive populations, socioeconomic factors, exposures, and environmental effects. During the committee process in the Senate, we worked with EGLE to clarify how they would identify these communities. A report on grant allocations would be required annually and be made to the public. And I do want to note that as this bill progressed through the Senate committee and through the floor, a number of suggestions were incorporated into the bill at the suggestion of EGLE, and also a large number of suggestions from industry and chamber organizations. These include clarifications that some of the funds can be used for EGLE to support industry compliance efforts and prevention of future violations, removing language that would permit EGLE to use this fund to hire staff, removing language that would allow the fund to take philanthropic funds, removing the possibility that this fund could be used for buyouts, and making clear that the tools to be used for identifying environmental protection communities are EJ Screen and MI-EJ Screen only. If this bill becomes law, we will be able to, in a way that does not have a dramatic impact on industry, make a big positive impact for neighborhoods in my district and many of yours, and communities affected by air pollution. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Are there any questions for the senator? MVC.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to the senator. A lot of this has to deal with disadvantaged communities. Should we be looking at our planning commissions and other industries focusing on disadvantaged communities to get easier location for these areas that are creating air pollution? We putting the cart before the horse on the violations when we should be looking at how they're located, why they're located in disadvantaged areas? I mean, is there a concern there?
Yeah, so actually, thank you for raising that question. There is a colleague of yours in the House that I'm working with to sort of try to address that very issue of some communities where there is a lot of industry located in one area. And we believe that we should try to take steps at the state level. And so we are in conversations with EGLE about some legislation to address cumulative impact. But for now, what we're looking at is a situation that, I cannot count how many hearings I have been to where, the violation has already happened. There's been a violation notice. There's a consent order. And we really do need to deal with the fact that the money is not currently going back to the communities that are impacted. So I hear your suggestion, and actually we are working on that as well. But at the same time, because these violations are happening and we recognize that companies are making steps to get better, at the same time, we want the money to actually go back to the communities that are impacted. So that is the point of this
Yeah,
bill.
because I see in a lot of this, obviously industry is located where the workers are. for people who can get there easily. So I don't know how that works, and because they're going to be focused on urban areas. I don't know if that's just going to be the cause and effect of being in an urban area, and that's what you're going to have, or you're not going to have industry. I was just kind of curious what we're looking at there.
So obviously industry there's a lot of really important industries in our state. What we're trying to do is, again, focus on the situation at hand, which is that we've got companies that there is no question, right? There are violations that have happened. They are taking steps to address them through the process that Eagle has laid out in terms of their consent order process. But it's really important, again, that we're doing what we can to protect the communities that are there. So I appreciate your question. I think that as far as the question around, you mentioned urban communities, I would point out that there may be some rural communities as well who have high rates of poverty, where they might also, given the tools that are in place right now, potentially also be identified as environmental protection communities. So we're not necessarily saying in this bill which communities we're talking about, but there are tools available from the EPA and from Eagle to use data to identify what those communities should be.
Madam Chair, I have a separate question. So Eagle's the one monitoring and then indicating the violations, and then they're also the ones that prosecute and collect the violations. Seems like the same agency doing both. I would like to have a way to look at it with a little more oversight so that they don't enrich themselves by finding every little tweaked violation out there.
Well, I appreciate you raising that question, and actually, you'll hear from Eagle hopefully a little bit later on about how rigorous their process is. It is not an arbitrary thing. It's not subjective. It is very much, here is what the law says, here is what the standards are, and if you're violating them, here is the process to actually go through and identify what the penalty should be. And actually, in consultation with the company, there's a lot of back and forth between Eagle and the company around what that final consent order is going to look like. So I would actually just say that it's a very thorough process, and actually takes quite a bit of time, and having seen many of these processes over time, would just really make sure that, want to reiterate that it is not a subjective process. It is very much outlined in law and in guidelines by Eagle as far as the process that they take. And I think that in terms of, any notion that they're sort of willy-nilly issuing violations is just not accurate. So thank you.
Vice Chair Hill?
Thank you. I'm having some air quality issues myself today, getting over a very bad cold. So thank you for your testimony, for bringing this bill to us today. I ran a nonprofit organization in the early 2000s in Massachusetts that received fine money from the EPA. So I can speak directly to this process, at least how it's done in the federal level. I was the executive director of something called the Northeast Business Environmental Network, and one of our members, unfortunately, had a fire, and they were fined, and that money came back to us to help other industrial companies learn from the situation and provide training in ISO 9000, which is an international standard on environmental performance. So and that was, I'm old enough to say that was 24 years ago that this happened. So this is a well-established program, as I understand it, nationally, and it was a very rigorous process in terms of the attorneys having the conversation with EPA, the attorneys for the company that suffered the fine, and then the management of the company was very active in the education that came later. So it can be a very successful process. And it was $25,000, but 25 years ago. I mean, it was a not insignificant fund. So I'm curious, what is your expected revenue that you expect to see from this process going forward? And it's also one of these things where there's this idea that you would that the agencies might want to keep finding, but in fact, What you want is to not have these fines be generated. And this was a one-off. And believe me, in my experience working with these big industrial companies, including Raytheon, Very Fine Juice, there were Bell Labs, were all part of this organization. They did not want these things to happen. They're getting fined. They're in the papers. So this is an opportunity to create a process that reinvests into communities, but it also is a process that gives the businesses a chance to do good with a bad situation. But the question is about the money.
Yeah, no, thank you. First to comment on your comment, and then I'll answer the question. No, I appreciate you sharing that perspective, and this is really, really valuable, and we'll have to chat with you about that later too. I think, just going back to the earlier question, I think the whole point of issuing violation notices and doing these consent orders is to try to deter future violations. And so in some cases that has worked, because then there is, as a result of the consent order, additional pollution control equipment that's installed or different things, which is the whole idea of these violations and consent order, is to actually stop the violations. Although we've also seen repeat violators, which is a whole other issue. So anyway, but in terms of your question, so based on data from Eagle, over the past couple of years where we have data from 2020 through 2021, it's been around 1.2 million, 1.5, 1.2 million. So it's actually a small amount when we're talking about the general fund, but when we're talking about the impact on a local community and the air that they breathe, obviously it can make a giant impact.
We have a question from Representative Preston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Current tools exist both in the state and the federal toolbox in order to address air quality issues. Does the ends justify the means in regards to the subjective authority that we're going to hand an agency that will ultimately be brought to bear on manufacturers, on industry, when I really think the tools exist to already mitigate air quality issues? And air quality is somewhat subjective, and is environmental justice and groups and committees, is it defined in your bill? What's the definition of that?
Okay, so air quality is not actually very subjective. There are standards in place around, various types of pollutants set at the federal level called the National Ambient Air Quality Standards for each of them, whether it's sulfur dioxide or particulate matter 2.5 or all these different pollutants. There is actually a standard where you can measure them in the air. That's why we have air monitors that we fund as a state to actually identify what is the level of air pollution from this type of pollutant. So not subjective, it's actually very objective. So I would point that out. And you're right that there are tools available, and this is actually one of the tools that they have. So I think the question is, knowing that we have this tool, what is the result that we want to have for our communities? So again, this is not changing how much companies are paying. This is not changing how Eagle issues violation notices. It is only changing where the money goes. So the impact on industry is actually very minimal. This is not going to have any type of impact in terms of how much they're paying in terms of their fines. This is really about where the money goes.
Well, just in case I misspoke, I wasn't talking about subjective air quality. I was talking about subjective authority. The subjective authority that's going to be handed to Eagle in regards to the enforcement of this. The path to ruin was paved with good intentions. Have we looked downstream as to the ultimate consequence of legislation like this 20, 30 years downstream and its effect on the economy, on industry, and all the stakeholders that are going to have to deal with this type of legislation?
So I again, back to sort of comments that I made in response to the first question, it really is not subjective. Whether or not a company is violating their own permit that they signed off on or violating the air quality standards is actually not subjective at all. And so I'm hoping that Eagle can really respond to this, because it sounds like there are a number of questions about this, and maybe I'm not explaining very clearly, but I'm hoping that Eagle can maybe help further clarify that when they're issuing violations, it's actually very, very objective. So, but appreciate the question, and hopefully Eagle will help to further clarify.
Are there any further questions for the senator?
Again, the climate aspect of it, in the lack of definition in the bill?
Sorry, what is your question?
Environmental justice. Your bill cites that. Is there a definition for what's environmental justice? How does it fit into your bill?
Yes, so environmental justice is a term that has been around for a long time, that has been used by both Republican and Democratic administrations, both at the federal level and the state level. So it's actually it's not a new concept, but I appreciate that, it is, there are varying levels of awareness about what it means. But basically, environmental justice community, as we have defined it, which is on page 2 of the bill, means a geographic area that the department has identified as a community facing disproportionate environmental burden using the department's MIEJ screen or the US EPA's EJ screen, and indicators such as sensitive populations, socioeconomic factors, exposures, and environmental effects. So basically what we're looking at is communities that are disproportionately burdened by pollution. And it's so the reason why we specifically are mentioning the MIEJ screen and EJ screen is because they are tools that were developed with a lot of input and that are, well researched in terms of being able to use the data that is available to identify what those communities are. And again, Eagle is here and can help answer those questions as well as some of the other folks that we have.
Is it fair to say that it's a broad term subject to interpretation?
I don't think so. I think that we've defined it pretty clearly here, and I think that, if you'd like, I'm happy to meet with you offline and actually look at the EJ screen tool and the MIEJ screen tool, or maybe Eagle can do a better job showing you. But these are tools that are, again, they've been around for a little bit. They've been really thoroughly researched and put together after, a lot of work to ensure that they are, using the best data available. So thank you for your question.
Thank you.
No further questions? All right. Thank you very much, Senator. And next up, we are going to have Travis Boskel from Eagle come up to testify. And Travis is testifying in support of the bill. Floor is yours.
Thank you. And good morning. Recognizing the amount of people in the room, I'm going to kind of throw my testimony out and just try to respond to some of what we talked about here, be expedient. So Travis Boskel, Deputy Director with the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, and with me is Janine Camilleri, who's Supervisor of our Enforcement Unit in Air Quality. So we are here supporting the bill this morning. The Senator really talked through the intent, the changes that she made, but I want to talk a little bit about the enforcement process because I think that's pretty important here. So I'll just start out with a really broad statement that I feel is pretty darn accurate. The vast majority of violation notices that Eagle issues, violations that we discover, do not result in a fine or penalty for the company or the site involved. We have and you'll hear this too in my testimony on the next bill, we have an escalating enforcement process because most of the time when we find a violation, it's not something intentional. It's not something that the business or the industry is doing because they want to violate state law, because they want to omit. It's oftentimes faulty equipment or, sometimes just ignorance of an issue. So we issue a violation notice. They're given an opportunity to resolve that. If they don't, we issue a second violation notice. We refer it to enforcement, and we just keep working down that pathway. And only in situations where either you have a very recalcitrant kind of permittee or someone who's violating, or you have these ongoing, regularly occurring, or particularly severe violations, do we enter into like an enforcement discussion that results in an administrative consent order that the Senator talked about. And even once we get to an administrative consent order, not all of those have a penalty associated with them, because again, our singular goal through this whole process is to bring about compliance. And sometimes to the Senator's dismay, that isn't always about a fine or a penalty. It's about getting an enforceable order and a plan in place with a timeline attached to it that results in coming back into compliance. But we do have a penalty matrix that we use. It's a penalty policy. It's informed by US EPA guidance and requirements. And we enter those violations in, and again, it's very structured. It's, is this an air toxic? How many violations have you had? How severe were they? How long has this been going on? And it spits out a number, and we take that number and we go, and then we enter negotiations with the violator, and we settle on a settlement amount, again, because we're completely focused on this voluntary compliance, because we find that suing people doesn't really get voluntary compliance very quickly. And so in the case we're talking about here, the only thing that this bill really does is change the destination of that number that's settled in that administrative consent order. It's not giving us additional authority to go out and give new violations that we weren't giving already. It's not giving us authority to, just kind of make up violations. It's just changing where that money ends up. So I think that addresses a number of things that were discussed here. Here to support, here to take questions. Thanks.
I actually have a question. So that is all very, very helpful clarification. Thank you for that. And this might be a more complicated question than it is in my head, but let's just say over the last year, about how many of these cases resulted in fines for the companies, if you have that information?
Any idea?
We actually don't track that metric, but I would say between 5 and 10% of the violation notices that we issue will result in a company being referred for escalated enforcement. And on average, for our unit in air quality, we'll issue an administrative consent order or other type of enforcement settlement, on average between like 15 to 30 a year. So when you think about how many companies and individuals are working across the state, it is a fairly small number.
And I'll add too, the senator mentioned some of the revenue numbers. So if you go back, there are years actually where there's no revenue coming in right through these. So it's because of how enforcement works. So her numbers are accurate. We gave them to her, but this varies pretty significantly.
Vice Chair Hill?
Thank you. Going back to the screening tool, are you the folks, can you walk through, I've sat through multiple presentations of the, it's not, this Michigan Environmental Justice Screening Tool has been in development for 4 years, I think. I feel like I started going to meetings about this at least 4 years ago. And the environmental justice tool that the EPA uses and policy that the EPA uses has been around since the year 2000. Again, I can speak to that in my career. When I was at the Massachusetts Executive Office of Environmental Affairs, we had an environmental justice policy in the year 1996. So my birthday's next week, by the way, but there's a lot of candles on that cake these days. And so the idea that, that there's a disproportionate harm to communities that are in these places where there's a lot of industry is one that we've been wrestling with for 2 decades. This seems like and so could you speak to how Michigan is currently speaking to environmental justice very precisely?
Yeah, well, I'll talk a little bit about the EJ Screen Tool, and I'll look to Janine to help me a little bit as slightly more of an expert. I don't know that neither of us are the best to speak to it, but the EJ Screen Tool that we have in Michigan is primarily made up of 2 main components, right? You have your environmental factors and then your kind of socioeconomic factors that feed into it. So environmental factors, we're looking at the monitoring data that Michigan has on air pollutants, right? We have a EPA mandated monitoring network to tell us what's the ambient air quality. It's looking at things like sources of potential pollution or emissions, like contaminated sites, other types of potential releases. And then on the other side of things, you have things like racial and demographic data. You have, economic data in terms of property values, but also kind of income levels, minority populations, English as a second language. And those 2 things feed in through a formula to create a score for a community. And that's, all of those things are pretty typical in terms of nationwide, in other states. What are we considering when we talk about environmental justice? Is there anything you want to add, Janine?
No, that's it. And I think just to add too, with the bill, it does talk about using EPA's existing tool or Michigan's environmental justice tool. So at this point, Michigan hasn't finalized their tool. So until they do, the EPA tool that's been used and in effect for a long time will be the one that will be followed.
Are there any other questions for Eagle? Rep. Preston?
Thank you again. So in the bill, I'm reading the department shall develop guidelines. The department shall develop the guidelines in consultation with an advisory committee. Advisory committee consists of public health expert, representative of environmental justice, representative of the Department of Health and Human Services, a local health department official, 2 residents of environmental justice committees. Where's the private sector? Where's industry? Why is this not an inclusive committee where all voices are present to discuss the topic? This seems like it all sits on one side, and I'm still struggling with the term environmental justice
Yeah,
and how it pertains to this bill and what really seems to be a one-sided approach.
sure. So I'm going to answer your questions there in reverse order. So I think it's important to recognize actually this is a fairly simple concept at the start, right? Fines from violations go back to the communities affected, right? So that's going to be the number one target here. It's not going to be spreading it out necessarily all around the state based on this environmental justice community definition. It's going to go back to the communities impacted, and there's language that makes sure that that's a very important piece of it. In terms of the makeup of the committee developing it, it's important to recognize that the entire process, the entire violation process, negotiation process, enforcement process, it's just Eagle and the community in the facility, right? There aren't others inserted in that process. In fact, like I've had to tell Senator Chang that she can't join a discussion because it's subject to enforcement. So everything up until the point violation is settled, including sometimes, and we made sure there's language in here, including sometimes a project proposed by the facility to benefit the community to reduce their penalty amount. That's just us in the facility. So I think Senator Chang's intent, I don't want to speak on her behalf, but I think her intent is, since that half of the process is very weighted in that direction, this half of the process should really be focused on listening to the communities who are experiencing these impacts and what their needs are.
Can I respond too?
Yeah, of course.
If I can also respond, for the enforcement negotiations, there are times where we, with the company, will enter into a settlement that includes a supplemental environmental project. And we've been working with the companies to develop those projects for many years. And I know in those discussions, at times, the companies would really appreciate if we could take on the role of working with the communities. Because this is about, we're going to take some of the fine and put it back in the community. And if a project is occurring on the facility that's going to actually result in lower pollution, this will still continue under this bill. If companies want to make improvements on their site, this bill will not affect them being able to do that. But where there's going to be a project specifically in the community, I know in speaking with a lot of these like attorneys and the companies, they really appreciate us kind of facilitating and having those conversations with the community members. They also have, community panels and advisory committees, some of them, that they engage with on a regular basis. This would be a very small subset of a pot of money that would go directly to communities. So I think that's why we're seeing this bill drafted this way. But I do know that they do also appreciate when we can serve in that role.
And I can appreciate that. Just when I look at the committee structure, it just seems like there's a group of stakeholders that's purposely being omitted from the conversation. And I just don't know that that's fair to them and their concerns being heard.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Hill.
I can speak to the fact that in that situation I was talking about where my organization was not part of the fine process, as you say. The negotiation about how much money was entirely decided between the regulatory agency and the company. And then, because that's their regulatory oversight, and so we just found out when the money was available. So it's not that we had any sway on that. And then it's just a matter of how the money is going to be spent in the impacted community. There was a very clear line. So, and like I said, the company in this case chose to participate in the process because they didn't want others to have that failure. And they had a pretty significant fire and shut down their processes for several. They lost money, and so they don't want their fellow industry members to do the same thing. So there's a way to have this be a clear process.
Minority Vice Chair Martin.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. So the current budget, or the upcoming budget, increases Eagle's full-time employment, 100 employees, and it looks like 4 of them are going to be dedicated to air quality. Now, I had an asphalt plant in my old district, original district, and Eagle was very helpful in their concerns, the air quality management. It passed the air quality. They raised the stack to implement some of the stuff so that it appeased the people that were curious about what the air quality would be. And the biggest thing was to make sure that, I guess you want to say diversity, but civil rights that had been concerned in the past in that community had been answered in the process. So Eagle's done a fine job, and we are increasing the budget. But my point going to that is it seems like what you're saying is 5 to 10% are being penalized when they do have a finding. They're being compliant voluntarily. So it looks like the system's working well now. I just wanted to know, if it was even necessary to. You're already getting 4 more air quality people. I didn't know how much more, and if the budget needs. It's already in the budget, so I didn't know why this needed to be switched to the budget.
So actually, it's 18 more people in our air quality division. And thank you, legislature, appreciate it. I think the key point here, right, is those people are intended for inspections and permitting. The only thing we asked for in Eagle's portion here is that we can fund the person to administer the grant program that's being created. So, we came to the legislature, we said we need people for permitting, so I don't know that it'd be very forthright if we took one of those people and steered it away. So the intent, our only ask was, let's fund one person for this grant program because it's new requirements on the department.
Any further questions for the department? All right, thank you very much.
You.
Thank you.
Next up, virtually, we have Tim Minotis from the Sierra Club, who is wishing to speak in support of the bill.
Awesome. Thank you, Chair Pohotsky and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Tim Minotis. I'm the Deputy Legislative and Political Director for the Sierra Club, Michigan, and we're thrilled that Senate Bill 26 is before your committee today. It is fair and reasonable to ensure that fines for air quality violations go back to serve the needs of communities directly harmed by the air pollution in the first place. The Michigan Senate Energy and Environment Committee earlier this spring had the privilege of hearing testimony from Rhonda Anderson. And unfortunately, she can't be here today testifying. And I know if Rhonda were here today, she would make sure that you heard the names and stories of the people in River Rouge, E-Course, and 48217 in Detroit that are sick because of their exposure to toxic air pollution from industry next to their homes. And so before I go a little further, she did send me the following statement to share in support of the bill. And so I'm going to speak on that for a quick second. And so this is a message directly from Rhonda. I grew up in an era of what we call common sense. A practice of common sense would be if a person or community is injured, then that person or community should receive relief. My community is injured. People are sick because of the toxic air pollution we are exposed to. The sacrifice of our health is apparently the cost of doing business. This is environmental injustice. We will always keep pushing for a world where we have environmental justice, and unfortunately, we're not there yet. But Senator Chang's bill offers a contribution towards justice. Environmental justice communities do not want the money. What they want is the same as any community, and more important than money, clean air that we all can breathe. Lives free from asthma, cancer, and chronic health problems. Until we can breathe our air, this is a small way to compensate communities that pay the real cost of doing business in Michigan, end quote. And so, right now in Michigan, nearly half of our population, more than 4.7 million people, live in what is called non-attainment areas for air quality standards. Criteria pollutants that directly impact human health, affecting some communities more than others. We know low-income areas across the state face the worst air quality as a result of inequitable industrial policies. So fines from violators should not be going to the general fund where the legislature can spend this money however way they want. This money does deserve to go back to the communities where the violations have taken place. And so it's critically important that we provide our communities and residents who are affected by air pollution with adequately funded programs and services that will improve quality of life and public health in our neighborhoods. And this bill today helps provide that and provides a step in the right direction. And under this bill, Senator Chang spoke about it. I know Eagle, spoke on all this as well. It would help support air monitoring, buffering, retrofits, other beneficial programs that would help improve people's health and quality of life in these impacted communities. Again, we support this bill and encourage your support as well. So thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Tim? All right, thank you very much for your time, Tim.
Thank you.
Next up, wishing to speak to the bill in opposition is John, I'm going to mess this up and I'm sorry, Boothcoid from Michigan Sugar Company, if you'd like to come on up. I'm not sure I've ever actually said your last name to you, so perfect.
It looks scary, but it's pronounced like it's in.
I can relate. The floor is yours, thank you.
Well, good morning. Chair Pohutsky, Vice Chairs Hill and Martin, members of the committee. As was mentioned, my name is John Boothroyd, and I serve as the Director of Government Relations for Michigan Sugar Company. And I come to you today to oppose SB 26. To be clear, Michigan Sugar Company does not oppose the spirit of this legislation. Attempting to ensure that the communities affected by air pollution can benefit from the fines related to that pollution is an admirable goal. Throughout this entire process, from the legislation's introduction in the Senate to today, I have worked in good faith to find a solution to our issues with this legislation. However, as always, the devil is in the details. To fully articulate our objections to this legislation, I need to first provide you with some background on our company. Michigan Sugar Company is a farmer-owned cooperative with over 800 farmer owners. Each year, those owners harvest around 4.7 million tons of sugar beets on up to 160,000 acres in 20 Michigan counties and Ontario, Canada. These beets are turned into 1.2 billion pounds of sugar at our 4 Michigan factories located in Bay City, Caro, Croswell, and Seaboyne. Michigan Sugar Company has 1,000 year-round and 1,100 seasonal employees. Nearly 200 of the year-round employees are corporate, and the rest are manufacturing positions that we are proud to say are union represented. Michigan Sugar annually pays wages of over $75 million. Our total direct economic impact to the state is $600 million, and our indirect economic impact is $1.8 billion. Our concern with SB 26 stems from our facility in Bay City. Extracting sugar from sugar beets has an odor associated with it. This is not a hazardous odor or related to the usage of harmful chemicals. The odor stems from a facility that boils thousands of pounds of vegetables per day during the processing season. That is why all of our factories were built in rural areas when they were originally constructed. However, our facility in Bay City was built 120 years ago, and developments have encroached on it. As a result, Michigan Sugar receives 901 nuisance odor violations stemming from complaints at our Bay City location. There are several things that are important to note about these type of violations. Despite First, Bay City is the only one of our 4 locations to receive this type of violation, in spite of the fact that it engages in an identical process as the others. Second, there is no scientific way to measure odor. Therefore, the violations are assigned based off the subjective judgment of the Eagle official who conducts the inspection. Whatever the process is on paper, that is the experience of our company. Lastly, there is no fix to this issue. If our company could fix the problem tomorrow, we would. In fact, our company spends hundreds of thousands of dollars every year to reduce the scent at our Bay City factory and has invested millions of dollars in odor mitigation technologies that do not exist in any other sugar beet factory in North America. We believe that the creation of a fund for air pollution fines, a portion of which can be used by Eagle, will create an incentive to increase the number of fines levied annually. While increasing the number of fines levied on bad actors committing hazardous violations would be extremely difficult, non-hazardous, subjective fines like the ones we experience in Bay City would not. As a result, we are concerned that this legislation will lead to increased enforcement and fines on a problem that we cannot eliminate, effectively subsidizing the alleviation of issues caused by bad environmental actors on the backs of Michigan's sugar farmers. We do not believe that it is fair to treat nuisance odors on the same level as some of our state's worst polluters. I brought this objection to the attention of the bill's sponsor when this legislation was introduced, and I was told that there was a willingness to work with us, and I have and will continue to have discussions with them in good faith. As a result, though, we did not oppose this legislation in the Senate. However, as a solution is not yet forthcoming, in spite of numerous suggested changes that were relatively minor, we have been forced into strongly opposing this legislation. And with that, I'll leave you. Thank you for allowing me the time to speak today, and I will end by requesting that the members of this committee vote no on SB 26. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I have a question. It's similar to what I had posed to Eagle, but on the other side of things. How many fines has your facility faced over, say, the last year? And if we have to go back further than that, just let me know.
Yeah, I think since 2013, the number of violations is somewhere around 40. The number of fines I can get back to you on. And our concern is less about how many fines we've received versus how many we'll receive moving forward if enforcement happens more quickly. It's important to note that we actually do have a consent agreement right now in Bay City that covers odor. And we are not in violation of that consent agreement, and yet we continue to receive 901 violations.
But not fines.
I would have to check on that. I believe we've received fines in the past year, but I'll ask our environmental team, and I can get back to you in writing.
Okay, great, thank you. Vice Chair Hill?
I'm concerned that once again, industry is coming to this committee and not bringing any numbers and just bringing stories. If you're saying that you are concerned about the future of your plant, could you please give us, I'm really surprised that you can't tell us what those fines were. Violations happen as was described in the regulatory process.
Yeah, I can say we've had numerous fines. As I mentioned, we are currently in a consent agreement. I'm happy to give you exact numbers. I was planning, if there was a hearing, to bring a member of our environmental team with me, but I only found out about the hearing on Monday, and we just started our factory, so none of them were available. But as I said, I'm happy to get an answer in writing to you.
Representative Preston?
It's unfortunate that you didn't have more time to prepare for this.
Just one point. We've been meeting for months,
Yeah.
and I've asked that question before, so.
No, we have met with the chair.
And you've been asked that question before, right?
I do not recall that question, but again, happy to provide an answer for my environmental team.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So this is new legislation that's going to promulgate a committee with unknown rules. I guess my biggest question is, what is odor? You're boiling sugar beets, I'm assuming. Is odor pollution in Eagle's eyes? Is a smell a pollution? I mean, we embed smell in LP, natural gas for safety concerns?
And that is our.
Where does odor smell? Where does odor fall?
That is our concern, is that we can't, no one can tell us you have 100 smells and you need to reduce it by 6 smells, and here's how you do it. You know, it is a subjective process. You know, there have been times where we've had someone come and tell us there's no issue, and from our perspective, someone comes again later and it smells better and there is an issue. So there's really no way to judge it. And as I said, we literally have technologies there that exist nowhere else in the country, because our factory in Bay City is unique in its location, in terms of its proximity to populated areas. So our factory, I could pretty confidently say, has less odor than any other factory, sugar beet factory in the country. It's just I mean, we're boiling 10,000 tons of vegetables there every day during the processing season, so there is a scent associated with it.
Representative Arbit?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to hone in on something that you said at the end of your testimony, which is you're concerned about the increase in frequency of fines that you think you will get if this legislation is indeed enacted. And I'm wondering what part of this legislation gives you the idea that you're going to see an increase of fines, because I don't necessarily see that. So I'm wondering where that comes from.
Yeah, our concern is with the 30% that can be used by Eagle for training purposes, and I think there are a few other things in the bill. We feel that that does create an incentive to put money into the fund, and regardless of whether it's, because of animus, I think that does create a reason to, in subjective cases, find a reason to move towards a fine rather than find a different solution.
So there aren't, to my knowledge, there is a pretty rigorous objective set of standards and measures about how these fines are levied. I don't know why that would change. Is there anything in this bill that modifies the way that those fines are assessed? You're just sort of saying that you think that there's going to be a new incentive based on the new sort of allocation of where the fine is going.
Yeah, and as the representative from Eagle mentioned, fines, moving towards fines and a consent agreement is based off number of violations. So if you have people coming to our factory on a subjective basis who go from subjectively deciding there isn't a bad smell to there is, we will get more violations and therefore move faster to fines and get more fines and possibly additional consent agreements.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Are there further questions? Thank you very much. I am not trying to play musical chairs here, but I think one point of confusion that I had, and it seems like some other folks had too, was the notion that the odor issue is more subjective than an air quality issue. So, Travis, I'm really sorry. Would you mind explaining the process for an odor violation issue and how that works?
I think I'm going to ask Janine to take a stab at this first. Both of us spend most of our time sitting in Constitution Hall, but she'll give a stab at it.
Yeah, I'm going to do my best. Essentially, the way that the Eagle responds to and cites Rule 901 violations is a very specific process that we follow. We respond to citizen complaints either through our online portal, or we'll get a phone call, or through our PEAS line. Then we'll send out an inspector to determine if there is a nuisance odor. Our inspectors are trained in odor training. They all follow the same protocol and get the same training. And we have an odor form that we follow, and we determine based on frequency, intensity, and duration whether an odor will result in a Rule 901 violation. So just to be clear, we only document them if our trained staff go out and verify that there's a nuisance odor. It's not strictly based on citizen complaints. So there are many times where we go out and we do not document a violation. Does that help answer your question?
It does. And previously, you drew a distinction between violations and fines. So that's how a violation for nuisance odor is determined. What has to take place for there to be a fine levied?
So essentially, not all 901 violations will result in escalated enforcement. So essentially, we're looking at, is there a pattern? And is this something that isn't being resolved? So just getting one 901 violation doesn't result in enforcement, and that's when a fine may be levied, when you're referred for escalated enforcement. Once you're in enforcement and we issue an enforcement notice, we go through enforcement negotiations, the statutory maximum for a 901 violation is $10,000 per day per violation. So we do not follow the EPA penalty policy in calculating Rule 901 violations because it's a state-only law. So any nuisance odor that rises to that level, they all get the same $10,000 per day per violation, and it's based on the day that our inspector is out there documenting. So, so essentially, nothing in this bill will change how we evaluate and how we calculate fines for nuisance odor violations.
Representative Preston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What technology do you guys use to measure intensity and duration of odor? So when one of your field guys gets on site, what technology do they use to quantify this?
We don't use technology. We use our nose.
Okay.
And we use our, like the training that we've received through the odor training. So we don't use any, I know there are certain types of technologies out there that, you know, if you kind of collect the odor and you may smell it in some kind of, and I'm not using the right terms, like a box or something where you've collected it. But essentially what they'll do is they'll go to the site, they'll, you know, evaluate, you know, what they're smelling, and then they'll drive around the area and look at, you know, how far in distance-wise, how strong it is. Sometimes they'll have a physical reaction to the smell. So there's a lot of different things that they'll look at to document the intensity and then the duration. How long are they smelling it for? Sometimes the wind changes direction. So we may have that in Michigan where the wind will change, or it's a very windy day and there might be a strong scent for a very short period of time, and that doesn't rise to an hour.
The thing I just want to underscore quickly here is...
Can I just make a point?
Sure.
It's, as a paramedic, it's a biological fact that your ability to smell a continuous odor depletes over time. Usually 30 minutes you go nose blind to an odor. So the fact that we're sending field agents out and not rotating new ones in to determine whether or not that odor continues to exist seems like a flawed process to begin with.
Representative, first off, if you're going to ask a question, please don't interrupt them and let them respond. But second of all, nose blind means you would no longer smell it, so that would weigh in favor of the industry. But please let Travis finish answering your question before we ask them another one.
I was speaking to process, though.
Okay, so let the process take place.
So I think one other factor too is that our violation process takes into account is it can't just be somebody driving through, right? We're talking, it has to be folks who are living or working in that community, because you do have a point, Representative. For people who aren't around there, they actually experience it very differently compared to people who may have become acclimated to it. So we actually take that into account, I think. The other thing, I feel like we're getting a little off track here in terms of what this bill does. This bill doesn't create Rule 901. This bill does not give Eagle authority on odor violations. All of these things still exist, and they still will exist. And as far as I'm aware, I don't know that the Bay City factory has gotten fined for odor violations.
Yeah, they have not.
They've gotten fined for a number of other environmental violations in air quality, in water resources, but I also don't know that a committee hearing is the appropriate place to litigate enforcement actions of the department.
Was that my question you were answering? They have not received an odor fine?
They have received fines for violating their consent judgment, but under the consent judgment, there is not a fine for a Rule 901 violation.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. Do we have any further questions on this piece for Eagle? Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming back up. Next up to testify in opposition of the bill is Carolyn Lethian from the Michigan Manufacturers Association. Also, folks, we don't have session to contend with, but I would like there not to be a mutiny. So if we can keep testimony to like roughly 5 minutes and then have questions after, I appreciate it.
I'll keep it to less than that. So thank you for the opportunity to testify, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am Caroline Lethan, Director of Environmental and Regulatory Policy for the Michigan Manufacturers Association. So we are respectfully testifying in opposition to Senate Bill 26 today. MMA members support communities in which they live and operate, in part through ensuring compliance with environmental statutes to protect human health and the environment. In instances when this does not occur, state government has legitimate authority to institute penalties and enforcement actions to ensure compliance with state and federal regulatory statutes. However, as I said, MMA respectfully opposes mechanisms within the bill to achieve these shared goals. As you know, violation fees currently collected by the state go into the general fund. They are then distributed via the budget process as the legislature deems appropriate. If the legislature wishes to appropriate funds to specific communities or agencies for specific activities, that is their prerogative on an annual basis. Enforcement is an important function of EGLE that is currently and appropriately funded via the budget in this transparent manner. Funding these activities via a separate fund could create a perception that a steady stream of penalties are necessary to cover these costs. Further, the concept of environmental justice is referenced throughout the bill. MMA has engaged with EGLE on this issue, including understanding the build-out of the MyEJ screen. Yet, further stakeholder engagement is necessary to ascertain a clear definition of environmental justice and how it will be incorporated into agency decision-making. These decisions will have implications beyond Senate Bill 26 and should be established through the rulemaking process. Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I and MMA are interested in offering productive solutions, which I hope I have provided in some part today. As introduced, we must oppose, but I do appreciate the opportunity for continued discussion and meeting these shared goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Rep. Hill?
I heard that there's an anticipation there'll be about $1.2 million at most coming to this. What is 30% of $1.2 million?
I don't have a calculator in front of me.
It's $360,000.
Right.
What percentage of your manufacturing associations would be harmed by $360,000?
I mean, I think it's the perception of it and the appropriateness of the appropriations process that we go through on an annual basis. It's the concept more than the number.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Carolyn? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, wishing to speak in opposition is Michael Amo from the Michigan Chamber. Oh no, did Mike have to leave? Ah, there he is. Oh, that's right, you're in overflow. I'm sorry. Keeping everyone in suspense. The floor is yours. Thanks, Mike.
Ms. Chair, thanks for the time today. I will keep it even more brief than my previous colleague here. We do oppose Senate Bill 26 as currently written for a few reasons, and just provide you a little context. So we've talked about all these issues. So again, I'm not trying to overburden you with the same information, but we do take issue with the reference to the MyEJ screen being one of the tools to identify environmental justice communities. As was pointed out, environmental justice isn't a term that is clearly defined, and so we have sincere concerns with codifying that term when it hasn't gone through a rulemaking process, et cetera. But that being said, as was pointed out, the MyEJ screen is a work in progress. We have significant concerns because it significantly departures from the EPA's approach, and it uses criteria that ultimately we believe doesn't match the intent of what how we want to identify EJ communities. And so what we saw was criteria that would ultimately lead to a number of communities, a number of additional communities being identified throughout the state, dozens throughout the state that wouldn't qualify under the EPA screen. So we think that, you know, we are putting the cart before the horse by referencing a tool that isn't finalized, and so would ask that that be removed from the bill. We agree with the previous colleague around the subjectivity of 901. We've talked plenty about that, so I won't get into it any further. I think ultimately there is subjectivity within the process by which we identify those violations, and so we think the fix is pretty easy. It's just to not allow those to qualify under this bill. There is structurally a change in incentive by putting this fund under Eagle. I mean, that's definitively what this bill does. And we support the spirit of that. We think that the idea that this fund should be used by Eagle to work with organizations within the communities that are impacted by these penalties makes a lot of sense. It's just that we want to make sure that we're not creating perverse incentives. And so we could talk ad nauseum about that further, but I think we're looking at some pretty, you know, I think fairly straightforward changes in order to move the bill forward. So I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
We have a question from Rep. McFall.
Yes. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you testifying. Can you give specifics as to what in that would expand it, the criteria that would include more communities like you mentioned?
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to hear
can.
some specifics.
Yes,
yeah.
I can, and thank you. I will follow up with the feedback we provided to the council on that. One of them was a brownfield per capita criteria, but if you have a lot of brownfields in an area that's not fully, heavily populated, I would argue that's not a situation where you want to, you're looking at emission type issues, right? That brownfields can be, but ultimately EPA decided that wasn't an appropriate criteria for determining what a community should look like. So there's a number of those, and I can follow up and share those. Yeah. Yep.
Minority Vice Chair Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you to the chamber. Would you agree that subjective verification, a kind of a definition, Major League Baseball has very strict rules, and umpires have different strike zones. Would you equate that to being a subjective interpretation?
Yeah,
I mean, they're human interface between two humans rather than.
I think the point that we're getting at is there are objective standards in place, and there is rigor, and certainly we're not here saying that we have an issue with changing those. But ultimately, yes, there are sometimes subjective approaches to identify, working within those objective standards. Yep. Yeah.
Are there any further questions? Oh, Rep. Hill.
Has the chamber asked for subjectivity in the application of the regulations to your industries?
I'm not sure what the question is.
The issue of subjectivity and flexibility can be applied both ways. And so I'm asking, I'm new to this job here, and so I'm wondering, has your organization asked for subjectivity in the application of the rules in previous occurrences?
We have in the past asked for flexibility. Sure. Yeah.
Further questions? All right, thank you very much,
Thank you so
Mike.
much.
We have some cards to read in on SB 26. Not wishing to speak and supporting the bill, we have Nick Acapinti from Michigan League of Conservation Voters, Mike Spence from Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, Nicole Biber from Clean Water Action, Megan Tinsley from Michigan Environmental Council, and not wishing to speak but opposing the bill, Amanda Fisher from NFIB. Before I forget, though, I'm very sorry. I had notes written by hand. We do have one last person or group giving testimony. It is the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center, and I believe they are being joined by Simone Sagavac from Southwest Detroit Community Benefits Coalition. So if you would like to come on up.
Good morning, committee members, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Simone Sagovac. I have lived and worked in the city of Detroit for over 30 years in Southwest Detroit, which is our heavy industry engine for Michigan and beyond. I'm here to let you know about the type of community that needs air quality protection and some of the successful projects that are helping to improve health for thousands of people. Our community hosts industry that serves all of Michigan, yet we bear the daily burdens. I don't know about each of your communities and how many air permits are required to emit pollution, but we have over 40 in the Detroit Southeast Michigan area. Within a short distance in our community, many industries also call it home. An energy plant, multiple steel mills, all coal-fired powered, that generates soot, a lime plant, one of the largest sources of sulfur dioxide in the state, our wastewater treatment plant that serves a third of Michigan's population with a dozen incinerators, multiple cement factories, an auto plant, our state's largest oil refinery, and our border crossing with Canada with 10,000 daily semi-trucks, just to name a few. Teachers in schools in our community have to have piles of inhalers on their desks for children in their classrooms to use when needed during the school day for their asthma. When air violations occur, it only makes sense that the fines received would somehow help those affected by the pollution that causes those violations. You may be aware that there is a certain health protective level set for each air pollutant, and we have many. When a level is exceeded, we are deemed in non-attainment for our air quality and health protection. In my community, we have been in consistent non-attainment for over 15 years. Once in non-attainment, it then takes years to implement plans to bring us back into the legal range of air pollution. We are in the illegal range now, which means that it is known and has been known for years that our air is harmful to everyone who lives there, and especially to children who breathe faster and with smaller lungs than adults. Now the good part. In recent years, we have been able to secure funds through supplemental environmental projects that result from different actions. These funds have been invested in helpful programs that are making a difference. But this has occurred only in special circumstances, not by using regularly collected fines for polluting. These regular pollution fines have gone to the state's general fund, with no direct benefit to the people who have been harmed by the pollution. Some successful programs have included: we've gotten air filters placed in schools like the Salina Elementary School in Dearborn that is surrounded by steelmaking and automaking emissions. Now we are working to put air filters in a number of charter schools in the Detroit area. We would like to work directly with the public schools too. Cleaner air in the classrooms means students can focus on learning. In other programs, we provided windows and HVAC systems for homes along I-75 freeway where truck traffic is heavy. 175 families received this program, and residents have been grateful. Residents say they can finally sleep through the night and feel rested for work the next day. A couple with a new baby said their baby was able to sleep with the new windows. Many homes in the area are not up to modern standards, with old windows and doors that let polluted air into the homes. Most homes don't have air conditioning. With our extreme high heat weather, this is a problem. Residents can't open windows to get air because of the outdoor pollution they let in that causes asthma incidents. Programs can help solve these problems so that kids can focus on learning in school and families can be safe from pollution inside their homes. While small programs don't solve our air emissions problem, the community projects made possible by directing funds are helping people. Thank you for supporting this fund to assure that some of the harm can be addressed.
Good morning. Andrew Bashi of the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center. Routinely being hit by a waft of paint-like fumes after opening a door or window to your home would concern any reasonable person. For Robert Shope, who's a longtime resident of Beneteau Street on Detroit's east side, exposure to potentially hazardous pollutants makes him more than concerned. He's genuinely afraid. Having already fought cancer to remission once, Mr. Shope's health status makes him particularly vulnerable to the adverse impacts of environmental contaminants. He, like all of us here, just wants to be able to breathe. As a staff attorney with the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center, I represent residents like Mr. Shope across our state, urban and rural, that have been forced to live with irresponsible polluters that routinely violate our air quality laws and place the health of Michiganders at risk. Polluters like Stellantis, a company that in 2019 amassed over $400 million taxpayer dollars to fund building a paint shop a mere 400 feet from Mr. Shobe's door. Since doing so, it's repeatedly failed to comply with air quality laws. Exactly 2 years ago yesterday, in fact, it received its first violation for the facility, and since then, it's amassed 7 more. It's routinely been the source of those strong paint odors that interfere with nearby residents' use and enjoyment of their homes. The company failed to install ductwork connecting air from a portion of its paint shop to be processed by emission control equipment before its release. And this allowed untreated air laden with volatile organic compounds, to be emitted directly to the environment for residents to breathe undetected for months. Even after the company learned its mistake, it continued to operate unrepaired, forcing nearby residents to live with this excessive air pollution. This facility is seriously impacting the health of Michiganders, especially residents of the abutting Beneteau Street. Residents, including many children, have developed symptoms that include persistent coughs, increased mucus production, tightening of the chest, difficulty breathing, routine and intense headaches and migraines, and various unexplained skin conditions. The cumulative impact of facilities like this one are vicious. Census tracts surrounding the Stellantis plant exhibit levels of asthma prevalence among adults 130 to 176% that of the state as a whole. The tract bordering the complex immediately to its northeast ranks number 1 of 2,772 census tracts in the state for the prevalence of asthma among adults. 1 of 2,772. The absolute least our state should guarantee is accountability to the communities forced to bear the consequences of the violations perpetrated by these companies. This is especially pressing now, where public dollars are increasingly being diverted to subsidizing these industries that are contributing to the discriminatory chasm in health outcomes exhibited in many of your constituents' communities. As the law stands today, any fine or fee paid by a company to resolve violations of our state's air quality laws is directed to the state's general fund rather than back to those communities that are forced to absorb the impact of those violations. Until now, our state has done little to ensure that the residents suffering the health and quality of life impacts often accompanying violations of air quality laws receive direct redress at the expense of the facility responsible. Almost a year after production at this plant began, MD Eagle required Stellantis to pay a $136,832 fine, all of which went to the state general fund, not directly to address the issues residents are facing. To this day, the facility continues to generate air quality complaints from residents, impacting their health and quality of life. Making this bill law will help us reach a place where those bearing these impacts can access the resources our state should have begun mandating decades ago. Things like air quality monitors, vegetative buffers, air filtration systems. And it does so by requiring the fines and fees associated with air quality violations to be paid to the fund that we've been talking about today. When it comes to prioritizing the health of our residents, no matter their socioeconomic status, above the interests of industry, our state has failed in nearly every metric. There's no better time than right now to turn that around, and that's why this bill has our full support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony. See no questions, so thank you. We will not be taking a vote on this bill today. We will take it up at a later time, but thank you all for testifying. Next up, we are going to hear testimony on House Bill 4832, and I know Representative Rogers has to go testify over in the Senate shortly as well, so I will bring her up. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Well, I guess maybe we're about to be afternoon, members of the Natural Resources Committee. And thank you, Chair Pohutsky, for bringing House Bill 4832 before the committee today. This legislation is extremely personal to me because it was introduced as a direct result of a man-made disaster in the Kalamazoo River in Kalamazoo County that affects both my district as well as surrounding communities. It's very sad to me also that we are coming up on the 4th anniversary of this man-made disaster. In October of 2019, the operators of the Morrow Dam lowered water levels around their dam on the Kalamazoo River to make repairs deemed necessary by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, known as FERC. However, they did not properly consult with the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, EGLE, or the Department of Natural Resources, the DNR, prior to taking their actions. As water gushed rapidly down through the gates, this resulted in 400,000 cubic yards of sediment that had built up behind the dam over many years being released quickly and rapidly downstream into the Kalamazoo River. I just want to pause on that 400,000 cubic yard figure because it's kind of hard it was initially when I found out about this, it was hard for me to comprehend what that means. It's estimated that that represents 11,400 dump trucks full of muck and sediment. Maps show approximately 9 to 11 feet, if you can imagine how tall that is, of muck that is choking our river. This has severely damaged areas of it. It has killed off critical mussels and fish habitat, ruined the normal ecology of the river, and diminished many of our recreational areas. It has set back the overall recovery of the much abused Kalamazoo River from the 2010 Enbridge oil spill. And what's even more frustrating is that years later, much of the mud and sediment is still there. This preventable disaster has caused lost fishing seasons, lost spawning seasons for smallmouth bass and native freshwater mussels, while years of inaction have continued the damage done to our river's ecosystems. While the responsible party eventually deployed some turbidity curtains and other equipment to try to monitor or slow the spread of sediment downstream, they have failed to take the most helpful action, simply cleaning up this mess and dredging the rest of the sediment out of the river. Senator McCann and I sent letters to the responsible party initially expressing our constituents' and communities' desire to see these destructive sediments removed from our river. The Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy had attempted negotiating a settlement agreement to address the situation based on what the company was willing to do. So far, that has been to remove only 2,100 cubic yards of that $400,000 cubic yard amount. This equates to about half of 1% of the full amount. In February of 2021, the responsible party issued a news release saying that they were developing plans for further sediment removal projects and would share these plans in March of 2021. Unfortunately, no additional plans have been seen to date and no further dredging of sediment has occurred. My community has continuously expressed disbelief that the state does not have any statutory mechanism to compel cleanup in this particular situation. And they are right. We should be able to do something. House Bill 4832 would provide authority for the director of the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy to issue written emergency orders to require removal of material like this from our inland lakes and streams when it threatens or damages our natural resources or public health. Eagle Creek Renewable Energy and its subsidiary STS Hydropower should not be able to choose when or if they need to take responsibility for this mess that they created. This bill will give the director of the Department of Environmental, Great Lakes, and Energy the additional tools they need to require that the responsible parties take corrective actions if they pollute our waterways. This tool is necessary for Kalamazoo, and it could benefit many other communities facing similar situations in the future. Joining me in testifying this morning are Doug McLaughlin, Executive Director, Kalamazoo River Watershed, as well as Travis Boskel from Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Eagle. Doug will offer some perspective on the impact of the Kalamazoo River's ecology. This testimony is not only compelling, but it's heartbreaking. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity, and I can address questions after he goes, if that's okay.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify today. I have a few pictures a number of which were presented the last time a similar bill was put forward. This is a picture of the area of Morrow Lake once the water was drawn down. This is showing the bottom of the lake and gives an idea of the scale of the source of the sediment that was eroded from here and carried further downriver. A little bit about the Watershed Council. The Kalamazoo River Watershed Council is a 501c3 nonprofit organization whose mission is to restore and protect the health of the Kalamazoo River, its tributaries, and its watershed by collaborating with the community, government agencies, local officials, and businesses. The council is an impartial, science-based education and information partner and advocate for the Kalamazoo River. We are, as an organization, proud of our 30-year record of working constructively with a wide range of individuals, communities, organizations, municipal governments, and businesses to address water resource issues in an area, the watershed, that is over 2,000 square miles in southwest Michigan. We're primarily a grant-funded organization, and our work includes efforts to be a reasoned public voice, active in addressing and preventing pollution issues, whether toxic PCBs from our region's industrial past, the Enbridge oil spill in 2010, or challenges today from urban and agricultural runoff, land development, and spills. Devastating events like the slow, steady, preventable downstream of release of hundreds of thousands of cubic yards of sediment during the repairs to the Morrow Dam that took place over more than a year also demand our attention. On screen, you will see pictures showing some of the impacts of that event. Several of these pictures were shared, as I mentioned, by at a previous hearing by Mr. Ryan Baker of the Kalamazoo River Alliance. My predecessor, that is the predecessor to the Watershed Council, also testified before that committee. The pictures provide a stark but limited view of the massive volume of Morrow Lake sediment that was lost downstream and redeposited in many parts of the river where previously there was little or no sediment. This sediment blocked access and increased risks to those using the river, including fishermen, canoeists, kayakers, and other members of the public, and buried valuable rocky bottom habitat that is critical to many kinds of fish and wildlife. The result of the sediment loss has impacted a number of those who are looking to the Kalamazoo River as a valuable resource in southwest Michigan. The Morrow Lake sediment release catastrophe is a prime example of why House Bill 4832 is needed. The massive scale of damage to the Kalamazoo River caused by this event occurred because of inaction on the part of the responsible party to stop the sediment release and an inability of regulators to act in the face of that inaction. The result? Large-scale damage to a river ecosystem that is an important asset to the quality of life in southwest Michigan. We understand that this bill will not address the damage that has already been done. We are hopeful that that will be addressed in the future. But we fully support the passage of this bill to give regulators the authority it needs to stop similar environmental disasters from occurring in the future. As my predecessor testified in 2022, Eagle needs expanded appropriate authority to enact compelling and effective enforcement in the face of environmental emergencies where other established regulatory authorities are not sufficient. House Bill 4832, which has been developed in consultation with Eagle staff, provides that authority. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
And I just want to point out this picture right here is one of the fishermen that actually got stuck with feet of muck, and he's trying to push off to get the boat going again. I also want to point out a thank you to Senator Sean McCann, who is in the room on a different matter, but we are working tandem. He's got a Senate bill companion. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Rep. Arbit.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is for either of you. Thank you, Representative Rogers. So you said that with the case that you're talking about in Kalamazoo River, that the entity that is responsible was attempting to meet a federal obligation that they had, and they didn't consult with the DNR or Eagle, or what Eagle was at the time, in order to do what they were doing in terms of the water level. I'm wondering, does this mandate any sort of communication or pre-clearance from Eagle or the DNR to do something like that?
I'm going to let Travis address that directly, but my understanding is there's already statutes in place where they're supposed to be communicating.
Okay.
So what this does is saying that when this kind of disaster happens, that there's an emergency power within the director of Eagle to address these situations. And right now, for this particular situation in inland lakes and streams specifically, that doesn't exist in state statute.
Okay. Because, I mean, part of the question was that if Eagle had known about this, previously, could they not have sought an injunction in a court to sort of prevent this?
Again, I'm going to have Travis kind of address that topic, but what I'm saying is what's supposed to happen is the company would have communicated with Eagle, and they would have made a joint plan to do this in a different way than was executed.
Got it.
So that's the purpose of the communication plan, is to avoid these situations in the first place.
Right.
Vice Chair Martin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want some follow-up from the testimony that we had the last session. So Morrow Lake, the dam it was lowered to repair the dam. The dam is back in place. The reservoir is refilled, and therefore there's no natural flow to encourage the removal of the silt naturally also, or help alleviate it. So there's no, like all the rains that we've had and so forth, there's no additional way for the sediment to move. The sediment's going to have to be moved by manual labor.
Actually, the opposite is occurring, and probably Travis can address this as well, but what's happened is as the years keep going on, this would have been an easier cleanup had it been done in the first year. As to your point, rains are coming in and stuff is moving down, this is a moving disaster, and so it's lengthening.
So it's further downriver, and
Yes.
What if there had been natural flow of the river, would it have aided more of a, I know it would have moved downriver, but would it have also helped clear the sediment, long term over the length? I'm just wondering if the reestablishment of the dam is inhibiting the removal of the sediment.
I don't think so, and I think that's kind of speculative, with all due respect. But
I'm just asking information. I just want to know what can be done. I mean, it's there.
Well, what they started doing, what I alluded to, is what they started doing was dredging to take some of this out, and then that work was stopped, and no work has been done since.
Representative McFall.
Thank you. A quick question. Do we have any sort of idea of like the economic impact that something like this has? Because you mentioned about fishing and kayaking, and I mean that kind of branches out into small businesses that would also be affected.
I'm not aware of any specific numbers on economic impact. We do know that for a period, it was more difficult to get out onto the river, to access the river. And so while there are no numbers, certainly it appears as though there was a dip in the usage, which translates into economic impacts. I know from our perspective in helping to get people on the water with kayaks and canoes, during this period, it was much more difficult to do that. Some direct points of access were not available.
And we have a question from Representative Preston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very sympathetic to what you guys are going through. My question just has to do with more so definition of terms. I see the word structure in here as being potentially interpretive. Is there the ability to get it more well-defined into dams, structures, so that this is not left to open interpretation going forward and used against facilities, locations, structures that your original intent in the bill, which I can completely understand your position on, were meant for.
I'm going to let Travis address that issue. Thanks. Thank you for the question, though.
Do we have any further questions at this time? All right, thank you both very much. Next up, speaking in opposition to the bill is Peter Rodell from Honigman Law Firm. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Pohotsky. Appreciate the opportunity. I guess, are we in the afternoon? We are in the afternoon. So I will be brief. You know, there may be some items that Eagle does raise that I'm unprepared for, and I'd be happy to go back and talk to any of you individually after Eagle testifies. But first off, my name is Peter Rodell. I'm with the Honigman Law Firm. The matter before this committee is the subject of litigation, and this legislation does interfere with the ongoing litigation. As a result of that, while I will strive to answer any questions you may have, due to the ongoing litigation, I may have to defer answering some questions. You know, I do want to start out by agreeing with Travis, something he said just a moment ago, that a hearing is not the best place to litigate an enforcement action. And I want to start with a few other facts related to what has occurred. On October 31st, 2019, as a result of a third-party consultant inspection of the Morrow Dam, my client learned that the deteriorated conditions of the spillway gates warranted an immediate emergency drawdown to remove pressure from the gates and eliminate the risk of an uncontrolled flooding event. The potential uncontrolled flooding event would have posed considerable public health and safety risks to downstream communities, including Kalamazoo. Federal agencies, including FERC, designate Morrow Dam as a high potential hazard dam, meaning that the failure of the dam will likely cause the loss of human life. On October 31st, 2019, the very same day that my client received the inspection report, my client notified FERC, Eagle, and DNR of the need for an emergency drawdown and began a dialogue with all agencies involved that included measures to avoid, minimize, and mitigate potential environmental impacts. The dialogue between my client and Eagle culminated in a November 27th, 2019 letter from Eagle with a series of requests and a subsequent answer from my client on December 23rd, 2019. Based on this dialogue with the state and federal agencies, STS conducted the drawdown at an acceptable rate, performed turbidity monitoring downstream of the dam, conducted mussel surveys and relocations, and engaged an agency-recommended contractor to perform a field survey of aquatic organisms. Other than acknowledging the December 23, 2019 letter, Eagle did not meaningfully engage, respond, or otherwise request additional information. In fact, after their November 27th, 2019 letter, Eagle did not engage with STS until July 8th, 2020. I would note that Eagle already has the authority, as contemplated under this bill, to issue emergency orders regarding state-regulated dams. This legislation's purpose is to give Eagle that authority under dams that are under the exclusive jurisdiction of FERC. Such an act would create a conflict of law between federal law and state law. If the federal agency says do X and the state agency says do Y, What is a dam operator expected to do in that situation? To understand why giving a state agency like Eagle this extraordinary power is such a bad idea, we don't need to look any further than Edenville Dam, which was, and at its time, a state-regulated dam. Since 2018, and prior to the devastating flood, it was a state-regulated dam where Eagle did have the ability to issue such emergency orders. It did not use this extraordinary power, did not issue any emergency orders. In fact, as the media reported after the catastrophic event that occurred in Edenville, 3 weeks prior to the devastating flood, Eagle sued the owner of the Edenville Dam over mussels. Eagle fully participated in a dialogue with my client and FERC from October 31st, 2019, when it was known that an emergency drawdown was necessary, and the drawdown was modified based on Eagle's requests. I want to respond to Representative Arbit's question about an injunction. The short answer is yes. Eagle did have the opportunity to seek court action and an injunction at any time. The previous commenters alluded to pollution. In its complaint filed, Eagle did not allege any pollution has occurred. To the extent I'm able, considering the litigation is ongoing, I'm happy to answer any questions.
We do have another question from Representative Arbit.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to, what stuck out to me, you were talking about a potential conflict between potentially a state order versus a federal order. In that scenario, well, first of all, how often does that occur currently?
I can't answer that question because there's no authority for the state.
I mean,
not
not necessarily for this, an emergency mitigation order, but in general, in terms of these
in general, beyond this issue, right? There are cases where there's conflict of laws, and those are resolved by the courts, right? There's no there's no preemption, and there's no deferential treatment given under this act.
Right, but in general, the deference is to the federal government.
It depends, right? I mean, it depends on the court, and it depends on the particular situation, right? Public health, welfare, and safety is generally reserved to the state, so it depends on the issue.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions? Thank you very much. Next up to speak in support of the bill, we have Travis Boskel from Eagle.
Once again, amending my testimony on the fly, striking the word good morning and inserting afternoon. Travis Boskel, with me is Kyle Alexander. Kyle is Field Operations Manager for our Water Resources Division. Just gonna start by saying I am not gonna litigate the matter, and just kind of stop it there for a moment. I mean, we strongly disagree with a number of things that have been said, but we're talking about a piece of legislation here, right? We're not talking about a specific situation that we've been in a lawsuit on for a long time. Ultimately, this bill doesn't really apply to this situation anymore. This is not it's not an ongoing emergency that the release is still happening. We're talking about a situation that occurred that we need to learn a lesson from as a state, which is that we need a different track in certain types of situations than what we already have. So with that, I'm going to dive into kind of some of my prepared remarks and try to keep them as topical as possible. So I already talked a little bit about the escalating enforcement process that we have. We talked about that on the Air Quality Division bill. But what I want to get back to a little bit is when a violation occurs, there's not a lot of gradation in terms of our immediate response, especially in this Water Resources Division area, right? You can install a small seawall, or you can engage in other types of activities that aren't allowed by statute. And we issue a violation notice because, again, like I said earlier, most of the time what we experience are folks who aren't necessarily certain that what they did didn't comply with law. And usually that violation notice is enough. People come in, we get it figured out, and we take care of it. Again, there are situations where that violation notice isn't enough, and it continues for a very long time. That voluntary compliance is usually a lot faster than entering into litigation, than saying we're going to find somebody. Because what we've experienced over decades of doing our work in this state is if you threaten somebody with litigation, they dig their heels in and they intend to litigate instead of coming to the table and doing what's right to protect the natural resources of the state. So that's why we focus on that voluntary compliance. Now, that being said, I think it's pretty clear here that there are situations where you need a different type of process. And this isn't some novel idea either. This language in this bill is almost verbatim the language we have in state dam safety statute. Now, again, the dam in question isn't subject to dam safety statute. It's exempt from that because it's a federally regulated dam. But so we have the ability, when dams are about to fail in the state, to issue an emergency order. And I think one of the key pieces in this legislation that hasn't been discussed so far, it's not just about the emergency order, because ultimately that order is us still asserting the exact same authority that we have under other statutes, which is you shouldn't be doing this, it's clearly a violation of law, you need to fix it. One of the things that this gives us, and it's what we have in dam safety statute, it's what we have in contaminated site cleanup, is if there's a situation that seems dire or seems dangerous, we can go out. If they don't comply with the order, we can go out and do the work ourselves to take care of that situation and then seek cost recovery to reimburse the state for our expenses. And I think that's maybe one of the key pieces here is not only does it give us this off-ramp for these particularly impactful situations, but gives the state the authority to take care of the situation, to clean up the mess. Now, we don't have a pot of money necessarily to do that, so we'll take one of those in the next budget cycle, but it does give us that authority. So I didn't look at my remarks that whole time. I think that mostly covers what I was hoping to discuss. So we'll take some questions from the committee now.
Rep. Arbit.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've been mostly, illustrating the problem that we're trying to solve with this bill with one instance of a dam where the water levels were lowered and that caused catastrophic damage to the environment surrounding. I'm wondering if you can give the committee a little bit of, maybe some other examples in which this type of emergency mitigation order might be useful or utilized.
Yeah. Let me start by saying I think they're few and far between. I don't think there are so many things where a catastrophic situation occurs that there isn't an immediate response of some kind that happens. So I think there's been a few examples in the past few years that we've experienced. There was a large kind of dock collapse in the Detroit River area. It was a contaminated site. Luckily, again, responsible party came to the table. We got that cleaned up pretty fast. It was an ongoing sediment release from that site, and we got it cleaned up pretty fast. But that's one where you can imagine if that wasn't occurring, if we didn't have a cooperative party, we could have taken action. Another one, a little less maybe on the emergency side, is we have had a barge that has repeatedly sunk up in kind of the Grand Traverse Bay area over and over and over again. We get it moved. There's laws that normally allow us to have it salvaged, but no salvage company will take it because it's not worth the money to go after. So when we have one that's repeatedly ending up on the bottom, it may allow us to take action in situations like that, depending on what kind of water body, that kind of thing.
Okay, so I mean, and in terms of what you said previously in your testimony about Eagle, if theoretically there was money available to this order would enable you to do the work and then seek recovery after the fact. Because this is not necessarily circumscribed by like the size of the body of water or anything. Really what you're trying to say here is that, no constituents of mine, on Orchard Lake or Pine Lake or any of the lakes in my district really have to worry about Eagle showing up, to their house and doing some work on their lakefront property. That's not something that people really have to worry about.
Yeah, I think you can look at our activity under the dam safety statute and the same power that's there is basically the standard, right? I hear folks, and I've had discussions with folks who feel like this is really broad authority. I think threatening public health or public trust in the resource is a pretty high bar to get to, and it's going to take a pretty severe event to get to that. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Kyle.
No, I think Travis is exactly right. I think we have effective rules and regulations in place that for the vast majority of the issues that we come across work effectively. This is really for that 1% where we have a responsible party who may not be willing to work with the department, and we have natural resource impacts to human health and safety that are significant and need to be addressed.
We're talking about patching a hole, filling a gap in the system for worst case scenarios.
Right.
Cool. Thank you.
Vice Chair Hill?
Thank you. I just wondered, sort of following on Rep. Arbitt's question, the statutory authority of the bottomland seems to be, is that really the lever here? Because the bottomlands can be, could you go to define that, please? Because I think that's a really important point, and it's not always clear,
Yeah,
especially inland versus Great Lakes.
Yeah, you shortcutted me to that distinction I was going to make. So this is in Part 301 of NERIPA, which is inland lakes and streams. So actually, this authority wouldn't apply on the Great Lakes system. It would apply inland. But when we talk about bottomlands, right, it's the bottom. It's the area under the lake and stream. Is that you want to add clarification there?
Yeah, I mean, we could get into a pretty technical discussion on what would constitute bottomland for a lake and a stream. I think, in summary, this would apply for anything impacting an inland lake or stream in the state of Michigan.
And again, I think the uniqueness is while the dam safety statute allows us to address issues at the dam itself, right? Is that dam going to fail? This allows us to address the consequences of what's occurring, right? The impact to the natural resource because fish can't spawn there, that kind of thing.
Rep. Preston?
Thank you again. Just for clarification from last year's bill, there's a introduction of language on page 2, line 3. Natural resources or the public trust. That language was inserted. Can you clarify as to maybe why?
I'm not certain. Is that new language? I'm not certain that it is. I can bring up 813 from last year, but I believe that's old language because, again, it mirrors what's in the dam safety statute, but I could be incorrect there.
What's the impact, though, of that language?
What's the impact? I mean, so I'm not an environmental attorney. Public trust is a pretty well-recognized term in Michigan law. Kyle, do you want to talk about public trust and what we do?
I'll try.
Yeah.
And just for everyone's clarification, it is from the previous bill as well.
Okay.
813 from last term.
Yeah, I think for the purposes of this conversation, most activities that impact natural resources in a state water also impact public trust. And in short, you could look at that as meaning they're impacting the public's ability to utilize that body of water. So they kind of go hand in hand, impacts to public trust, impacts to natural resources.
All right. Seeing no further questions, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
We have a number of cards from folks both in support and opposition not wishing to speak. For the sake of everyone's time, though, they will be entered in by the clerk. I will not go through them one by one. Last but certainly not least, thank you all for your patience. I have Senate Bills 103 through 105 introduced by Senators Cherry, McCann, and Daly. If you would like to come up and give your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for bringing forward these bills. In the interests of time and the committee members' patience, I'm going to try to be very quick. The purpose of these bills are to create a basic regulatory framework for commercial hunting and fishing guides for the protection of Michigan's natural resources and to encourage positive sportsperson experiences in the state. The primary objectives include prioritizing client or participant safety, preventing game law violations, and enhancing professionalism across the state's commercial guiding industry, and also to make sure that the department receives useful data that will help them manage our state's fish and game populations. The bills outline specific requirements for commercial guides, including licensing, CPR, having a valid Michigan's driver's license, and not have had felony or game violations within the past 3 years. There is a fee that guides would have to, application fee that guides would have to pay, $150 for residents, $350 for non-residents, but the license would be valid for 3 years. So the equivalent cost for a resident would be $50 a year. And then the bill also includes reporting requirements on the activities of guides that would be sent to the department that helps the department determine the impact, what's happening in our game and fish populations. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bryce with Senator Daley's office.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Cherry, for inviting us to be on this package. Senator Daley sends his regrets that he can't be here in person. He had a constituent meeting that he had to get to. Our bill, Senate Bill 104, creates the licensing requirements for commercial hunting guides in the state. Hunting is a vital part of life in this state and can be a great source of food and fun. Senator Daley is a farmer. He understands firsthand the benefits of managing animal populations via hunting. It is our hope with this legislation that everyone can feel comfortable retaining the services of a commercial hunting guide. And he agrees with the wide range of stakeholders who have worked diligently on these bills over the last several years. Senator Daley believes that this package provides a low threshold for entry and a basic framework for guides while protecting our hunters and ensuring increased data is available for wildlife management decisions. We encourage the committee to support Senate Bill 104 and be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you. I'll just finish up with my bill is Senate Bill 105 of the package, and it's very simple and straightforward. It simply directs that the Michigan Natural Resources Commission would have the exclusive and specific authority to regulate sport fishing under Part 487 and to regulate the use of commercial hunting guides and sport fishing guides in taking game and fish. Thank you.
Are there any questions for the bill sponsors? We're just doing testimony. We are going to adopt the amendments for the drafting error issue, but
Just the sponsors that are testifying?
no.
Okay, my question will probably be for somebody.
All right. Anyone else have questions with sponsors? All right. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. First up, testifying together, we have representatives from MUCC, Trout Unlimited, and the Michigan Hunting Dog Federation that will be coming up to testify together. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Amy Trotter, and I am CEO of Michigan United Conservation Clubs, and we have been working on this package of bills for a great many years. This issue even predates me, but I've personally been working on several versions over the last probably 4 legislative sessions. I can say with assuredness this is stakeholder driven. We are persistent, and we've been back here in the legislature talking about this issue now for many years. It is a moment of alignment as well for our many fur, fin, and feather groups that we have here in our state. We are committed to this issue and see it really as something that we've been trying to address in different ways, but we really do lack the regulation for inland hunting and fishing guides here in our state. We've been informed by other states. We've looked at what other states are doing in terms of their regulations, and I can say confidently that this is a relatively low bar that we're talking about. We want to get this started. This is a good piece of infrastructure to look at and to get some amount of data and understanding of what the guiding community looks like here in our state. As we know and has been said many times in this committee before, hunting and fishing is big business in our state, $11.2 billion a year annually. And what we really want is to recognize, understand, appreciate, and protect the professionalism of our legitimate hunting and fishing guides. We do not want people who poach one day, who now cannot hunt, cannot fish the next day, to still guide our hunters, our novice hunters and anglers who are perhaps trying something brand new to them, which is why they're employing a guide to begin with. So this is really important to our novice hunters and anglers who may not know the game they're pursuing for the first time, may not know the area that they're going to. We do believe that it takes place in variable conditions. So we want to make sure, again, these novice hunters and anglers have someone that does have some level of skills to be able to help them in an emergency situation. It's in the field, it's subject to different weather conditions, different field conditions, and as many of you know, sometimes getting in is a little differently than getting out, and especially if you're dragging something. So we want to make sure, again, that these guides are professional and that they have that base level of certification of CPR and first aid to be able to help their clients in those situations. Again, as I've mentioned before, we do have penalties and robust penalties for poaching. What we don't have is an actual definition of a hunting or a fishing guide in statute. So we cannot prescribe licenses or penalties to those individuals until we have a basic definition of what they are and who they are. And so with that, I will conclude my comments and pass it along.
I'll be brief, but I've never done that before, so it might be difficult. I was present when the idea of needing a guide license happened in the west end of the UP 10 years ago on the last weekend of March. And guiding has grown exponentially in the last 10 years. It's like everybody's using a guide as hunting animals like bobcats and bears and things that people aren't familiar with, even grouse. Guys are making $1,000 a day guiding for grouse. So if people are selling our game, we should at least know who they are and what effect they're having on that population, whether it be fish or whatever. Now, I can say this is a piece of legislation of the people. It was the organizations, the fish and the wildlife that developed this, that brought this forward, that we need this. And I could just give you a real brief example of why. I'll use bears. If you want to go hunting a bear and you go on your own, not guided, you've got about a 27% chance of getting a bear. If you use a guide, you're over 50% chance of getting a bear. Now, as we have less and less boots on the ground, the department is more and more and more using data gathered from hunters on hours spent and so forth. This bill started out way different than what you see here today. It's pared down that all the sportsmen's groups are on board, and the fishing groups, the trapping groups. We need this. We need to know the data. Then when they enter that in a computer, if people are guiding, and that skews the numbers, and they're using those numbers, those success rates, to determine how many bears are out there. So that's just a little example. It was brought forth by the people. It wasn't the DNR. It wasn't even MUCC. We gathered this crew together to bring this about, and it's needed. That's as brief as I could ever be, and thank you. If I have any questions at all, I'll be happy to answer them.
All right, I'll scooch forward and see if everybody can kind of hear me here. My name is Brian Burrows, and I'm the Executive Director for Trout Unlimited here in the state of Michigan. And we are a fisheries conservation organization, and nationally are the largest one that we have in the U.S. And so I'm going to kind of stick with that theme in telling you why we're very supportive of this bill. And I should say my background is in fisheries, so I'm just kind of a humble fisheries biologist, and my comments will reflect that. But Michigan has, by all accounts, somewhere over about 12,000 inland lakes and about 70,000 miles of rivers and streams. So the amount of water that we have before we count up having the largest collection of fresh water in the Great Lakes is pretty incredible. What that's always meant, and this isn't new, is that if you look at the level of funding that we all have to work with to manage that amount of water and that amount of fisheries, it's never been close to enough. And what I mean by enough is, with so many different kinds of fisheries and so many waters, we are unable, and I mean we meaning collective, the agencies and all of our resource groups raising private funds and writing grants to work on them, we don't have enough to really collect all the data and all the places to keep a really tight handle on what's happening with all of them. So we prioritize just like everybody else. You try to get a couple of places that you're going to get some trends on, and we do our best. Moving forward, that challenge is still there, right? We need more funding, but it's always going to be limited. And the reason I am in particular support of this bill is the requirements to be able to allow the DNR to ask those commercial guides what they're doing. And so how many clients do you have? How many hours did you fish? What species you caught? That is incredibly important information that we leave out there. And we can't really afford trying to be frugal and conservative with how we manage. It's data that is invaluable, right? So a lot of these guides, the both full-time professional ones, they have in total in Michigan usually about 200 days a year on the water for the full-times. That amount of experience pursuing 1 or 2 or 3 types of fish, for example, is really invaluable. If myself or the DNR tries to go out and get that much information about what's happening in a fishery, it's going to take us often $100,000 for a creel survey, $20,000 for fish electrofishing surveys. And the reason that I think this is really important is that we have a very low registration fee here, but I think the value to us is asking that information so we can understand what's happening with our fisheries. And I won't give examples because we've been here a long time, but we have ongoing fisheries issues right now that we're all trying to figure out what's the right course on. And we struggle because of the amount of things that we don't know about those fisheries issues. And having data like this helps us long-term understand, are we good? Are we increasing? Are we declining? We can be more responsive, see things coming quicker from this information. So for us, it's really a fisheries conservation issue, and we just need this type of data from these people who are out on the resource the most. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Rep. Martin?
So thank you very much. I agree that, you know, as I come to grasp with this, because I supported the first concept with a lot of questions, but you said it's been pared down, and I do see there. Well, I'll get to that. But the success rate is going to encourage hunters and fishermen. The time crunch, time management that people have. When my grandparents used to go deer hunting, they packed in and they were there for the 2 weeks. Now it's the weekend because they have many, many other obligations, costs not being the smallest one. So I'm encouraged by doing this because the success rate is going to encourage more hunters. And more hunters are going to keep the deer off our front bumper. But you keep mentioning professional guides. Is there associations, and this I never asked, is there association of professional guides that give like the Good Housekeeping seal of approval that could help pare down the bad actors from the good actors and maybe even cover certifications that you get certified because you do carry out first aid and some of these things the law already is going to ask?
At this time in Michigan, in terms of hunters and a sort of overall umbrella organization, no. There was one formed that I don't think they've been very active yet. And we actually contemplated creating a board of outfitters or something like that in legislation 12 versions ago. And some states do have that, where it's an actual board that oversees the industry and its individuals. We didn't want to go that far, actually, because we felt that that was just another layer of bureaucracy that we didn't necessarily need to deal with. That's why we wanted to start actually lower than that. to really just provide at least some even keel of information that we're getting consistently across the board from our guides. And on the fish end,
I want to get
Brian
something
can,
in the middle. I'm caught a monkey in the middle here. There isn't for hunting, and this wasn't created to discourage people from guiding or to limit guiding or have big government interfering with these guys. This was all about the data at the end. The organizations I represent here have a long and documentable reputation of defending the resource. And we're always on the side of the resource and always have been. And that's where we're at here. The data is going to help us defend the resource.
Yeah, very, very quickly as follow-up, on the fishing side, there are a couple of organizations in the state of Michigan. The Michigan Charter Boat Association is a voluntary collection of professional guides that run trips on the waters of the Great Lakes. And then there is a Michigan River Guides Association, which is its counterpart, that have, again, voluntary participation in it, but are river guides. And to my knowledge, neither has really gotten into trying to set industry best management practices or, certification levels. But I would say on the fishing side, most of the notions of this are very familiar. So anybody who guides on the waters of the Great Lakes or what's deemed as connecting waters has to register and go through training and certification through NOAA, basically the Coast Guard. And any guides who want to commercially operate on federal lands, so think the National Forest, they have to have a license and registration there. The federal licenses are restricted in number, so it's a hard entry point. Typically the guides, if somebody is getting out of it, they sell the right to their license. This has, none of that, obviously, in it. This is an open access program. But those other ones, while they ask the guides to report, for the river and the federal ones, they ask them to report things like number of trips and number of days on the river, but nobody is asking the river guides to report what they caught, how many hours they fished. And so there's pieces on the fish side, but not kind of an integrated situation. So hopefully that answers.
We also have a question from Vice Chair Hill.
Thank you, and congratulations on getting to this point. It's been a very long time. Two questions. One is, we had previously bills in front of us here about the timing, particularly the timing of the reporting of the deer hunt. So I hear a lot of questions about the reporting questions, so I just wondered how those would interact with each other. I can see that coming up in my district. People might ask me that question. And then the other question is, do you have anything about, as this develops 2 years from now, 3 years from now, in terms of refining it? Do you have that process in mind now? And could you speak to that? Or if you don't, that's fine too. Let's just get it over the line. I'm not suggesting it, but I'm wondering if you do.
To answer your first question, deer hunters, everybody, whether they were on their own property or whatever, had to report. This is different. When you're selling a bear, you're getting between $2,000 and $2,500 for that bear. And if you can't bother to report, well, that's the difference. When you're doing this commercially and selling game, the reporting should be. Well, you're my client, and I guide you. You're paying me $2,000 or $2,500 to whether I find a bear for you or not. So I find a bear, and I think it's a small amount to be able to report how that all happened and went down. It's different from the deer thing.
And also, just to go further, a hunting guide only needs to report annually, so it's a cumulative aggregate amount, not in each individual take. And then on the fishing side, I believe it's monthly, which again, because you might be fishing on the waters, on the streams, on a lake, different species, so it's a little more regular for that. Tends to be that hunting guides specialize in 1 or 2 species. And then on the sort of further refinement and what if we forgot about something, that's actually the third bill of the package, is the Natural Resources Commission Authority. We don't really know yet what we would contemplate them needing to weigh in on, but we put that in there because if there are issues of just units, disbursement, conflicts that come up that we did not necessarily foresee, they would have that ability to implement regulations through their normal process to administer the guiding program. And we would all be at those meetings, and as would the guides. Those are public meetings, and there's information before action. So that's why that bill is in there, is to contemplate any tweaks that we might need on the administration of this.
If I can just add one really kind of maybe nerdy piece to your question. So we can still mail out surveys to general angler license holders, right? So, but the increased power of this comes into who we're asking. So if we send out a survey to all licensed anglers, we get a huge amount of variability in what their catch and success is. So there's an old adage that 10% of the fishermen catch 90% of the fish, and there's actually documented studies that sometimes show that that's actually incredibly accurate. Not in all cases, but so when you're looking for trends based on whether or not catch rates of anglers are going down, not only is it more expensive to ask a large population with a huge amount of variability, but asking guides to tell us what their clients are experiencing under their tutelage is really a lot more sensitive to change because they have a higher level of effectiveness. They're super in tune with those fisheries, what's happening. So if we get that data, that is a lot more powerful to look at trends than just surveying sort of everybody. So, thank you.
Thank you. And last question, we have Representative Arbit.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering if there's anything in the legislation, and unfortunately I don't have the text in front of me, that sort of circumscribes where they are able to operate.
Well, they can't operate on federal.
Correct. So currently, hunting and fishing guides can operate basically statewide, except for Commercial Forest Act lands, which is just a unique piece of actually the tax law saying that you can't have other commercial activity on commercial forest lands. And so that's already state law, but it's tax law, not hunting and fishing law. They would not have any new abilities to hunt places where they might already be closed. So this wouldn't change any of the existing hunting or fishing laws already in existence. So nothing with that would change. And then the guiding license, I believe, is only required for land that is not owned by the guide. So in other words, they would not need a license to guide on the own land that they own and are operating on. They would need a license to operate on someone else's land, leased land, or public land.
Okay. And forgive me if this is an ignorant question. And I'm just wondering, in terms of the fishing piece, so there is nothing about this that would lead to, people starting to, do this in places where it's not super common. Like it's legal to fish and whatever, but but there might not be, like, there's no reason to believe that this is in any way going to sort of expand those areas where this is being done.
No, that's correct. I don't think I could conceive of anything in this that would start sending people to places that they're not already. But one of the great values of this is figuring out where people are currently already doing this activity, which we don't really have on paper.
Cool.
And
Thank
where
you.
they aren't.
Yeah. It helps us start figuring out what is actually being done.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. We're almost through, folks. Joining us on Zoom, we have Dennis Stakowitz, who is a grouse hunting guide.
Good morning, good afternoon, actually. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I'm having a little technical difficulty on my end. I'd just like to speak as an actual guide in the state of Michigan that's been guiding for several years, that I am in favor of this bill as it is proposed. I think it is really needed. There is a lot, as Mr. Thorman had said, there is a lot of guide activity that occurs, particularly in the northern half of the state and for sure in the Upper Peninsula. Over the past couple of years since post-COVID, I would venture to say that the guiding industry has pretty much exploded. And my personal interest in it, to be honest with you, is to make sure that we are giving a good quality experience to people that are coming to Michigan, which means that we have the appropriate first aid certification and so on and so forth, and appropriate guidelines. You know, the part in the bill about not hunting on commercial forest land, I venture to say that not a lot of people know about that. And it's kind of like a speed limit sign. It's going to make people aware, and it's going to hopefully make them do the right thing. And I've been involved with this bill since, I don't want to say it's about 3 years now. Maybe Amy can confirm that I've been assisting MUCC with this. So from my position, I'll keep it short, 100% in favor. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dennis. I don't see any questions. And last but certainly not least, we have Taylor Ritterbusch from the DNR here to speak in support.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Again, I'm Taylor Ritterbusch, the legislative liaison with the department. We are in support of the bill. As you've heard, this has been largely stakeholder driven, and our interest in this is making sure that we have data that we have not had historically, particularly where these guides are and aren't, and the success that they're having across the landscape. So we support these bills because it ensures professionalism and safety for our resident and non-resident hunters and anglers. And it provides consistent requirements and fees for guides in both the hunting and fishing realm. And again, that will provide us with very important data. So in the interest of time, I'll kick things over to Randy Claremont. He is our fisheries chief at the department.
Thanks, Taylor. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I can think of no better case where the stakeholders, the industry, the guides, our conservation partners basically make the argument for you as a management professional. So as fisheries chief, I'm just going to keep my comments brief and say our why is our Great Lakes charter boat captains. They are required to have a license and report their activity, whereas the inland fishing guides are not. So I have no idea if there's 300 inland guides or 3,000. What their activity is and how to manage it. So with that, I'll just say all the other points have been covered. This regulatory framework, in my opinion, is a minimum level needed to help us collect that information and to better manage the fishery. With that, I'll pass it to Sarah.
Hello, and I am Sarah Cummins. I represent the Wildlife Division today as the Policy and Regulations Unit Manager. We also really support this bill. These bills. We'd like to see some baseline requirements for the commercial guiding, and we feel that administering them would also be done in a more effective way if we had those baseline requirements and that nominal fee as well.
Are there any questions for the department? No? Seeing none? Okay. And I'm sorry, everyone, I did make one mistake. There is a representative here from the Congressional Sportsman Foundation. If we can please have them come up, but keep it to like 2 or 3 minutes, I would appreciate it. If you're supportive, I appreciate it, but please have new information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Bob Matthews. I am the Senior Coordinator of Great Lakes for the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. CSF exists to promote policies that benefits hunters, anglers, recreational shooters, and trappers. We do that at the federal and state level, and we do that through our legislative sportsmen's caucuses. Here in Michigan, we have a particularly strong caucus, which is co-chaired on the Senate side by Senator Cherry, and being bipartisan and bicameral. On the House side, your colleagues, Representative Amos O'Neill and Representative Sarah Leitner. Everything that I have to say in support of these bills has already been said. I want to point out the number that Amy Trotter pointed out, which was $11.2 billion annually. That's the economic impact of hunting and fishing in the state. It supports 171,000 jobs. This package of bills seeks to get more information and more revenue to the Department of Natural Resources, and it also seeks to increase consumer confidence in people that are trying out hunting and fishing for the first time. So, for the sake of time, I will yield my time and say thank you, and I hope that you support these bills.
Are there any questions for Bob, anybody? All right, thank you very much, Bob, I appreciate it. Folks, we do have two brief amendments there to address drafting errors. They're available on your desk or this table in front of us. They're both to Senate Bill 103. So I'd like for us to adopt those today, but we will not be reporting the bills themselves. Rep. Arbit moves to, or makes a motion to move the first amendment, which is amending page 6. Madam Clerk, will you please take the roll?
On the motion to amend, Chair Putsky.
Yes.
Representatives Hill.
Yes.
Shannon.
Yes.
Arbit.
Aye.
McFall.
Yes.
Pies. Martin.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Shriver.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 1 nay, 0 pass. The amendment is adopted.
Thank you very much. And Rep. Arbit makes a motion to move his second amendment, which amends page 7, line 25. Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
On the motion to amend, Chair Putsky.
Yes.
Representatives Hill.
Yes.
Shannon.
Yes.
Arbit.
Aye.
McFall.
Yes.
Pies. Martin.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Shriver.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 1 nay, 0 pass. The amendment is adopted.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. I really appreciate it. We got a lot done today. Seeing no absent members to excuse and no further business before the committee is adjourned.